I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The meeting was supposed to settle a private royal disagreement. Instead, it became the moment Prince William finally drew a line no one inside the palace expected him to cross. Queen Camilla erupted across the table. Catherine's composure suddenly collapsed, and before another word could be spoken, William pushed back his chair and stopped everything. What happened inside that room did more than leave the Princess of Wales in tears. It exposed a fracture at the heart of the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William had entered the strategy meeting expecting a discussion, not a rupture. Catherine sat beside him, knowing the agenda could shape months of duty, while King Charles had quietly signaled support for expanding her ceremonial responsibilities. A royal calendar is the planned schedule of duties, appearances, and ceremonies assigned across the family, and Catherine's proposed changes would place her beside William more often as his role grew. Camilla understood the symbolism. Every new responsibility seemed to make the queen consort's own place feel smaller. Camilla challenged the proposal sharply, but the argument changed when she turned from policy to Catherine herself. Her words struck at whether the princess had earned the trust being placed in her, and Catherine lowered her eyes, gripping her papers as emotion broke through her control. William watched her struggle. Then he closed his folder, pushed back his chair, and said the meeting would go no further. The prince ordered the senior aides outside and made clear that no official discussion would continue while his wife was being personally humiliated. Charles remained still. That silence hit William almost as hard as Camilla's outburst, because the king had privately approved much of the proposal now being attacked across the table. Catherine looked toward him once, then away, while Camilla held her ground and insisted she had every right to question how quickly authority was shifting. But one aide noticed something more disturbing. The Queen had repeated wording from a private conversation about Catherine's future duties, a conversation that should have been known only to Charles, William, and two household officials. William's anger changed direction. This was no longer only about a cruel exchange or Catherine's tears. Someone had carried confidential information into Camilla's reach before the meeting began. As Catherine finally stood and left the room fighting to regain control, William remained behind, staring at the people around the table, with a colder question forming in his mind. The worst part may not have been what Camilla said. It may have been how she knew exactly what to say. Behind the shouting were four people carrying four very different fears. Catherine feared that years of loyalty could be dismissed in a single humiliating moment. William feared he had failed to protect his wife inside his own family. Camilla feared becoming irrelevant as the next generation moved forward. And Charles faced perhaps the most painful choice of all, whether protecting peace in his marriage had allowed resentment to grow unchecked inside the crown. William found Catherine only minutes after the meeting ended. No aides were present, no secretary waited nearby, and for the first time since the confrontation, she stopped trying to appear composed. Catherine told him the criticism itself was not what had broken through her defenses. She had faced hostile headlines, endless public judgment, and years of scrutiny before. What hurt was hearing those words inside the family while Charles remained silent. Her proposed ceremonial program, the planned set of formal royal duties she would gradually assume beside William, had never felt like a prize to her. It was preparation for responsibility, nothing more. Catherine removed the meeting notes from her folder and placed them carefully on a side table. Then she told William something he had not expected. Weeks earlier, she had considered withdrawing from part of the program because she could already feel the tension building around Camilla. She had kept that fear to herself because she did not want another disagreement between William and his father. The prince stared at her in disbelief. She had been quietly surrendering ground to preserve peace, while others were interpreting her silence as ambition. William told her he had not stopped the meeting simply because she was his wife. He had stopped it because no future monarch could allow humiliation to become procedure. Catherine understood what he meant, but the words carried another warning. If personal attacks were allowed to shape official decisions, then the problem was no longer private. It threatened the trust required for the family to function when William eventually carried greater responsibility. Charles confronted Camilla later, without advisors around them. He asked why she had turned a disagreement over duties into an attack on Catherine herself. The Queen refused to apologize for questioning how quickly authority was shifting, but her confidence weakened when the King told her she had crossed a line. Then he admitted something more troubling. This was not her first objection. During an earlier private conversation, Camilla had already questioned whether Catherine was being elevated too quickly. Charles had dismissed those concerns as temporary frustration. Camilla did not deny it. She had spent years fighting for acceptance, and watching the next generation move forward had awakened fears she thought she had buried. But William now knew those fears had been growing long before the meeting exploded. Ordinary disagreement had turned into something sharper, more personal, and far harder to contain. To understand how it reached that point, William would have to look backward, to the Windsor moment, when the rivalry finally stopped being unspoken. The explosion inside the palace did not begin that morning. Its true starting point came weeks earlier at Windsor, during an event so controlled that almost no one outside the royal household noticed anything unusual. Catherine was asked to take one step forward. Camilla was asked to surrender one responsibility. No voices were raised, no doors slammed. Yet one brief exchange beside a rehearsal table quietly transformed professional tension into something intensely personal. Charles made the change during a ceremonial rehearsal, asking Catherine to lead a major segment that had normally been coordinated through Camilla's household. A ceremonial rehearsal is simply the private preparation for a major royal event, where timing, roles, and formal responsibilities are settled before the public ever sees them. William had supported the adjustment because he wanted his wife increasingly prepared for senior constitutional occasions. The change did not remove Camilla's rank or title, but everyone understood the message. Catherine was being prepared for a larger future, and the Queen Consort felt that future moving closer. Camilla waited until the rehearsal ended before confronting Charles. She asked whether he was slowly transferring her influence to Catherine without being willing to say it openly. The king rejected that idea immediately and told her this was about continuity, not replacement. But she pressed harder, insisting that every new responsibility seemed to travel in the same direction. Charles reminded her that the institution had to prepare for the next reign long before that reign actually began. His explanation was calm. Her reaction was not. Catherine entered before the conversation had ended. She heard enough to know she was the subject of the argument, and for a moment nobody spoke. Instead of defending herself, the princess quietly said she was willing to step back from the assignment if that would prevent further tension. That offer should have lowered the temperature. Instead, Camilla answered that stepping back for appearances would not change what the household had already decided about the future. Charles immediately told her the remark was unfair. Catherine said nothing more and left. Charles picked up the rehearsal sheet she had left behind and turned back toward Camilla. He told the Queen that his daughter-in-law had just offered to sacrifice an important responsibility simply to keep peace inside the family. Camilla did not apologize. She did not withdraw her objection. The king later described the exchange in a private documented account as the moment he realized the disagreement was no longer only about ceremonial work. William would discover something even more disturbing afterward. A handwritten scheduling note from that rehearsal, including possible additional duties for Catherine, somehow reached Camilla's private office. He had never authorized it to leave the small planning group. Weeks later, After the palace meeting exploded, that detail returned with new force. The language Camilla had used sounded frighteningly close to information contained in that confidential material. The Windsor rehearsal had not caused the resentment, it had exposed it. And when those buried feelings returned to the same table weeks later, William was no longer willing to let royal politeness hide what was really happening. William does something almost unheard of. Inside a carefully managed royal discussion, he sends the machinery of monarchy out of the room. Secretaries leave. Advisors gather their folders. The door closes. Only family remains. Catherine is still shaken, Camilla is still angry, Charles is caught between them, and William no longer sounds like a prince trying to preserve harmony. He sounds like a future king demanding the truth from the people closest to him. William had already stopped the meeting, but removing the staff changed everything. An official palace meeting normally depends on advisors, prepared notes, and carefully controlled wording to keep disagreements from becoming personal. Now none of those protections remained. Catherine sat in silence, still trying to steady herself, while Camilla faced the prince without anyone available to soften what came next. Charles understood immediately that the argument had crossed out of procedure and into family territory. William told Camilla that questioning Catherine's duties was legitimate. Attacking her personally was not. The Queen answered that everyone expected her to remain silent whenever the future king and queen wanted something, as though her concerns automatically became selfish simply because succession favored them. William rejected that argument. He said, disagreement was not the problem. The problem was turning private insecurity into public humiliation, inside a room where Catherine had been expected to remain composed. Catherine finally lifted her head. Her voice was controlled at first, then began to break as she asked why Camilla had never approached her privately. If the Queen had concerns, she would have listened. There had been no need for an audience. No need to turn the disagreement into a test of loyalty. Camilla started to answer, but William interrupted with a harder question. How had she known the exact details of Catherine's future ceremonial brief before the proposal had been formally circulated? Camilla hesitated. Then she said the information had come through household discussions. Charles immediately reacted. A household discussion means the routine exchange of planning information between separate royal offices. But he knew those ordinary channels had never contained the specific details she had repeated. The king asked her directly who had given it to her. She did not name anyone. That silence changed the entire meaning of the confrontation. Camilla stood as though she intended to leave. William remained near the end of the table, making clear the conversation was not finished. Catherine wiped her face and quietly told him not to fight a war on her behalf. The prince looked back at her and answered that this was no longer only about her. Someone had taken restricted planning information and moved it beyond the people authorized to see it. William then made the decision that turned a family argument into a palace crisis. Nothing concerning Catherine's expanded duties would move forward until he knew where the information had come from. And once that question was asked, the real battle was no longer about tears, status, or wounded pride. It was about who controlled information inside the monarchy, and how quietly that power had been used. Royal power rarely arrives with shouting. More often, it appears in schedules, briefings, access lists, and the quiet decision over whose papers reach the king first. After the confrontation, William begins examining precisely that machinery. What he discovers does not prove a grand conspiracy. It reveals something more believable and more damaging. Personal loyalties have begun shaping how sensitive information moves between royal households, leaving Catherine exposed before decisions are even formally discussed. William asks his private secretary to trace exactly where the Windsor planning summary went, and who received the later proposal concerning Catherine's expanded responsibilities. A royal household is the team of aides, secretaries, advisors, and staff supporting a senior member of the family, and those separate teams must constantly exchange information when major events overlap. That system depends on trust. Once sensitive material begins traveling too freely, the people controlling access can shape a debate before those directly involved even know one exists. Charles reads the distribution record alone. His expression changes when he reaches one name. An advisor who regularly coordinates with Camilla's office had received an informal copy of the draft. The king places the page down and says nothing for several moments. He had always believed keeping different households informed prevented confusion. Now he begins to understand the danger. Information about family sensitivities had been treated like ordinary scheduling material, and that carelessness had given personal tensions room to grow behind closed doors. William finds something even more disturbing. The copied document never instructed Camilla to challenge Catherine, nor did it question the princess's right to take on more responsibility. But it gave the queen consort enough advance knowledge to prepare objections before William or his wife realized resistance was hardening. Then another detail appears. Catherine's private hesitation about accepting one ceremonial responsibility had also traveled beyond the tiny group she trusted. Something she had admitted in caution had effectively become negotiating material. Charles summons the advisor, whose name appears on the record. He does not begin with an accusation. The king simply asks, "Who told you this needed to be shared?" The advisor hesitates before explaining that the material had been passed along because Camilla's household was expected to be kept aware of anything affecting major ceremonial planning. That answer unsettles Charles more than a denial would have. No single order had broken the boundary. The boundary itself had become dangerously unclear. William now understands why Camilla entered the meeting already armed with details Catherine believed were private. Charles understands something equally painful. His desire to avoid excluding anyone may have helped create the very conflict he was trying to prevent. The king knows calming his son and wife will not be enough. The information system itself has to change. By evening, Charles makes his first decision. And when Camilla learns what has been restricted, she finally realizes William's halted meeting has already begun reshaping life inside the palace. The shouting ends, but the consequences arrive quietly. A revised briefing protocol appears. Sensitive planning papers are restricted. Catherine withdraws from a small private engagement to regain her composure. William cancels another family strategy session. And Camilla, sitting alone after Charles explains the changes, finally understands that the palace has not simply moved past her outburst. It has responded to it. And the response limits the influence she once assumed was secure. Charles orders that sensitive future role planning stay inside smaller designated groups until each proposal is ready for formal discussion. A briefing protocol is simply the set of rules deciding who receives important palace information, when they receive it, and how widely it can be shared. The king presents the change as a procedural correction rather than a punishment, but everyone involved understands why it has happened. William also pauses further meetings about Catherine's expanded ceremonial duties. He will not ask her to return to the same atmosphere while the wound is still fresh. Catherine struggles with that decision more than William expects. At home, she tells him she fears the crisis will now be remembered as the moment her tears forced the palace to rearrange itself around her. The princess does not want sympathy to become another kind of weakness. William rejects that idea immediately. He tells her the real failure came earlier, when private information and personal resentment were allowed to collide inside a formal meeting, while she was expected to sit there and absorb it. Her distress did not create the problem. It exposed it. Camilla receives the revised arrangements from Charles personally. One advisor who had previously seen early drafts concerning the Prince and Princess of Wales will no longer receive them automatically. The Queen understands at once what that restriction means. The information trail has consequences now. Charles tells her privately that he will not reverse the new boundaries simply to avoid embarrassment. For the first time since the confrontation began, the king openly supports the principle William had defended. Sensitive family planning cannot be used as fuel for private rivalries. Camilla says little while he is there. After Charles leaves, she reads the same paragraph of the revised briefing sheet twice, folds the paper, and places it face down. The anger that had driven her through the earlier confrontation begins to give way to something quieter. She understands that this is not a temporary cooling-off period. Something permanent has shifted in how the palace will operate around her. Then Camilla surprises Charles. Instead of demanding that the restriction be removed, she asks whether Catherine would agree to meet her privately. No advisors, no William, no king, just the two women whose conflict had now changed the rules around them. The next decision no longer belongs to palace machinery. It belongs to Catherine, and whether she is willing to hear Camilla without anyone standing between them. There are no aides outside the table taking notes, no king waiting to intervene, no future monarch positioned between them. Catherine and Camilla finally sit opposite each other, with nothing protecting either woman from what must be said. The meeting does not begin with an apology. It begins with silence. And in that silence, both women understand that whatever happens next will decide whether the family can recover or merely learn to hide the fracture better. Catherine had agreed to the conversation only after speaking privately with William. She told him she did not want another formal intervention and did not want him answering every insult on her behalf. This time, the princess wanted to speak for herself. Camilla had made a similar request of Charles, asking him to stay away because his presence would turn a personal apology into another test of whose side the king was taking. For once, neither woman wanted the protection of palace structure around them. Camilla speaks first. She admits that Catherine's expanding role had stirred fears she had handled badly, and she does not pretend the outburst was accidental. The Queen says she felt the future moving toward her faster than she expected, and in that moment, she chose words designed to wound. Catherine listens without interrupting. Succession planning, the preparation for how duties and authority will pass to the next generation, had made Camilla feel as though every new responsibility given to the princess was proof that her own relevance was shrinking. Catherine answers quietly, but the restraint makes her words heavier. She tells Camilla that disagreement about duties was never the deepest injury. What hurt was being made to feel that her place inside the family could be questioned whenever the future became uncomfortable. The princess says she had spent years trying to avoid exactly that kind of conflict, often accepting less rather than demanding more. She had even offered to surrender responsibilities simply to keep peace. Camilla then makes a more difficult admission. In a private recorded account of the conversation, she explains that she had been seeing early planning material for months, and had wrongly assumed Charles silently approved her involvement in shaping those decisions. She had taken access as authority. Catherine responds that much of the material concerned duties she had already considered refusing. The Queen finally understands the cruel irony. The woman she had begun treating as a rival had repeatedly been trying to reduce the very competition she feared. Camilla finally says she is sorry for making Catherine cry. The princess does not answer immediately. She gathers herself, then says she can forgive anger, but she cannot accept a return to the same pattern. Future disagreements must come directly to her. No side channels, no private campaigns, no information passed around until resentment hardens. Camilla accepts the condition without argument. The agreement remains private, but its first test arrives almost immediately. Because outside the palace gates, the story of William halting the meeting is already exploding into public view. By morning, a private family rupture has become a public referendum on the monarchy's future. Commentators argue over William's intervention. Catherine's supporters praise him for protecting his wife. Others question how a royal meeting could deteriorate so badly. Yet one image captures the mood more powerfully than any debate. Outside Buckingham Palace, people gather beneath a newspaper front page showing Catherine beside the words, "William stops palace showdown." Suddenly, private pain belongs to everyone. William sees immediately that the story is no longer under palace control. Broadcasters begin framing his decision as evidence of a generational shift, with the future king appearing more willing to stop behavior that an older royal culture might once have buried beneath silence. A palace statement, the official written response issued on behalf of the royal household, confirms only that an internal meeting ended earlier than planned and that future engagements remain under review. It says nothing about the argument itself. That silence only deepens public interest. Catherine feels deeply uneasy about becoming the sympathetic center of the crisis. She tells William she does not want people reducing her to the woman who cried while he stepped in to save her. The princess also refuses to turn Camilla into a permanent villain. Whatever happened behind closed doors, she wants the next public message to be steadiness, not revenge. William agrees. He knows disappearing from view would allow the confrontation to define her more completely than the confrontation itself ever could. Camilla watches the coverage privately and understands how damaging the story has become. The Queen sees Catherine's distress repeated across broadcasts, while commentators dissect every possible meaning behind William stopping the meeting. This time, she does not ask Charles to push back publicly or demand a stronger palace denial. The king notices the change. She knows that attacking the coverage would only make the family look more divided. Outside Buckingham Palace, the tension becomes human. A visitor holds up the morning front page, while television crews report nearby, and another member of the crowd says the important part is not that Catherine cried, but that someone finally stopped the room. The phrase spreads through the coverage, because it captures what many people believe William actually did. He interrupted a pattern, rather than merely an argument. Then the palace quietly confirms one fact with real weight. The revised information-sharing arrangements will remain in place. William and Catherine decide she will attend her next scheduled appearance, while Camilla continues her own duties separately. No staged embrace. No artificial display of unity. Stability will be the message. But headlines cannot deliver the final verdict. That will come when the same four people enter the same institution again, and prove whether the day everything broke apart actually changed anything at all. The final meaning of the crisis does not lie in Camilla's anger, or even Catherine's tears. It lies in what happened afterward. William refused to normalize humiliation. Charles stopped confusing silence with peace. Camilla confronted the insecurity behind her resentment. And Catherine, instead of allowing herself to become merely the woman everyone rushed to defend, demanded the right to set her own boundaries. The palace meeting broke down, but the family emerged with rules it should have established years earlier. Several days later, the four senior royals meet again, under very different conditions. William arrives knowing this is no longer about winning an argument. Catherine understands that the real test is whether she can return without being treated as fragile. A sensitive planning procedure, the rules governing who receives private royal information and when, is now tighter, with only essential papers circulated and no early drafts moving casually between households. Charles has made clear that the old system will not return. Camilla speaks before business begins. In front of Charles and William, she acknowledges that her earlier conduct crossed a personal boundary and that Catherine should never have been placed in that position. The princess accepts the statement without forcing warmth that does not yet exist. She does not demand an embrace, a grand apology, or a public performance. That restraint matters. It shows that reconciliation does not require pretending the damage never happened. William then does something equally important. When the first difficult question about Catherine's expanded ceremonial duties is raised, the prince does not answer for her. He stays silent and lets her speak. Catherine responds calmly, explaining that the responsibility is about continuity and preparation, rather than replacing anyone. Camilla listens without interruption. The revised duties are approved, not as a victory over the Queen, but as part of preparing the monarchy for the years ahead. Charles makes the structural change permanent. He confirms through the final documented meeting record that sensitive family planning will remain restricted to designated groups. No dramatic punishment follows the information leak, but the system that allowed private vulnerabilities to travel too freely is dismantled. Later, the king speaks alone with William, and admits that his silence during Camilla's outburst made the crisis worse. The prince accepts the admission. For father and son, that private conversation becomes the reconciliation neither had expected when the meeting first collapsed. Catherine gathers her papers herself when the discussion ends. Camilla pauses beside her, offers a quiet goodbye, and receives one in return. William watches his wife leave composed this time, while Charles remains behind long enough to close the folder connected to the confrontation that started everything. The monarchy did not survive this moment because everyone suddenly agreed. It survived because disagreement was finally forced into the open, cruelty was given consequences, and silence stopped being mistaken for loyalty. William halted one palace meeting, but in doing so, he interrupted a pattern that had been hurting his family for far longer. Catherine's tears were not the final image. Her restored voice was, "Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one."